Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Melvin Harmon, and I'll be your MC today. All of us at AFS USA are grateful for your support, and we hope that you will find this hour to be informative as well as a reminder of the impact of the AFS experience, even in the midst of a pandemic. Before we start, I'd like to note two important elements of the webinar. First, as you probably discovered, all of you have been muted. We want to ensure that the only sounds that we're streaming to you are those of the presenters. Secondly, being muted does not mean that the presenters aren't interested in receiving your questions. As noted in the slide, we encourage you to send your questions via the chat function. For most of you, it's in the center at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Select my name as the recipient of your chat message and send it off. Time allowing, we'll pose as many of your questions as possible. Now I'd like to introduce our first presenter, Tara Hofmann. After having completed her first year as AFS USA's new president and CEO, Tara was faced with leading us through the most challenging threat our organization has ever faced. As you will hear from her, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a profound impact on what we do and how we do it. Of course, the pandemic has also threatened the availability of the resources that we need to pursue the AFS mission. Thankfully, Tara has been working in tandem with the AFS USA Board of Directors to lead AFS USA in weathering the storm. That's enough from me. I'd like to transfer the microphone over to our President and CEO, Tara Hofmann.
Thank you so much, Melvin, and welcome everyone. I am thrilled, all of the senior staff are thrilled to see so many of our donors and supporters who have joined us today. This is our first town hall for donors, and we certainly hope that you will like what we've put together, but we're going to be asking for your feedback after, because we want to put on more of these, and we certainly want to learn from you what would be of interest. But first, let's take a look at the agenda. I'm going to talk a bit about 2020 in review, some highlights. We're going to hear via video messaging from some of our repatriated American AFSers who were on program last year. I'll also talk a bit about our current priorities and the challenges that AFS USA faces. And then I'm going to turn it over to two really important people. We have an AFS USA host mom and a current AFS student from Switzerland, and I will properly introduce them in a few minutes. And most importantly, we want to make sure that we leave time for questions and answers. As Melvin pointed out, to please put them in the chat. But anytime you have a question, please know that I am always available to pick up the phone, to answer an email. And I really like to think of my office as my inbox, my open inbox. So again, I want to start by thanking all of you on this call for your generous contributions over this past year. Your generosity has enabled AFS USA to remain operational, albeit with dramatically reduced capacity, program activity, and staffing, but we are still here and we are doing good things and running programs. Everyone on this call has been touched by AFS in some way, in a meaningful way, either by a person or by an experience that you had with AFS. And I hope that by offering this opportunity for all of you to come together on this Zoom in this time of isolation, that you feel connected or reconnected to AFS USA. Before I go any further, I want to acknowledge and thank Candace and Bert Forbes. Candace is an AFS returnee and has always been passionate and an advocate for all that we stand for. She and her husband Bert generously contributed a $500,000 challenge grant, and I'm pleased to tell you that that grant, challenge grant, was met, and that was met in most part because of your generosity. This challenge grant was a major contribution enabling AFS USA to continue to operate and to enable us to shift our focus to the future significant financial challenges that lie ahead of us during the next program cycle. The challenge also enabled us to connect with new donors and reconnect with lapsed donors. Now, I know you've all received messages from me, emails, you've received a lot of correspondence from AFS USA over the past year about all the challenging actions that we had to take. So I'm not going to repeat all of those in too much detail. But clearly a significant action that we took was the repatriation of all of the host students in the United States, which was close to 2,000 students on AFS, and about 300 plus American students studying abroad on various programs. And we started that repatriation in March. I was, in fact, on a fundraising trip with Marlene Baker in California the weekend before this all happened, and we flew home, and within 3 days we had embarked on the repatriation process, and it's been nonstop ever since then. We were constantly dealing with challenges, we were constantly dealing with change, and we learned to be extremely flexible. But one thing that did not change during that difficult period of time was the steadfast support and engagement of the AFS USA volunteers who worked tirelessly to support the students and families in their efforts to get them home, to facilitate travel, to drive them to airports, and to support the students. And I want to stress that we were not only focused on the practicalities of returning the students and getting exit visas and medical reviews, but that we were very focused on supporting the students and host families and to provide them with opportunities to bring closure to their program experience. And we learned as an organization that we had to pivot, we had to do things differently, and we rose to that occasion. And I'm so proud of the work that the staff and the volunteers did to focus on the importance of the experience, the AFS program, when we faced so many logistics challenges. And during the spring, while we were still working to repatriate all the students, we were also working optimistically to plan for the next program cycle for the host students who were anticipated to come on the 2021 school year. And unfortunately, for a number of reasons attributed to withdrawals by participants themselves or their parents not feeling ready for them to go abroad, or whether travel was just not feasible, or whether the host schools had to take the difficult decisions to not host, we have a significantly reduced volume this year. We currently have 43 students on program in the United States on the year program, compared to the almost 2,000 we were anticipating, and we have 45 American students abroad compared to the 400 we were planning to send. All of these students and families are having a different kind of experience with COVID, but they are having an intercultural learning experience. And most importantly, we've learned firsthand that there are many families and many students who still want to go on AFS. They want to have an international intercultural learning experience, and that really infuses us with so much hope and enthusiasm for the future. So we will eventually hear from our host mom and host student, but first we're going to hear a bit from some American students who were abroad during COVID, and I'm pleased to introduce these AFSers to you, Matthew, Clara, and Caitlin.
Unfortunately, Julie's power just went off for a split second, but it turned her computer off. So she's rebooting. It should be less than a minute. So I think we could possibly go with our other guests.
Yes. So this is a good example of learning to pivot. So here we are pivoting, and I am very pleased to introduce Andrea Downs, who is a longtime AFS volunteer in the Southern New England team, who currently serves as the area team chair, and you live in Connecticut. And Zoe Kaiser is our AFS student from Switzerland. So let's turn it over to you, Andrea and Zoe.
Well, thank you very much for including us and letting us be part of this opportunity to speak to you about hosting and being an exchange student during COVID. It certainly is a different experience. We find that we are not necessarily having the same type of experience, but we're finding other things to do and other ways to share that we feel adds a lot of value to hosting, even during a pandemic, where our activities mostly are around things that are outdoors, that we can do socially distanced, that we can do in a safe way. But we also found that we're really discovering a lot of the natural gems in our area that we maybe had just kind of forgotten about or never took the time to investigate or to go see. So there's been, we've done some hiking to where we are been going to the local land trust, which we had never done before COVID. And we actually started doing that last winter with our exchange student before she was repatriated. And we are continuing to do that now. And it's a great way to discover the area that we live. We are being more creative in finding ways for us to spend time together as a family and to just enjoy being together. And I actually think Zoe's acclimation was a little quicker this year than it has been with our other exchange students. And I think that has to do with the fact that we're really getting to know each other and really spending time together. And I think that that's really kind of key here. She seems totally comfortable in our house and did in about 4 weeks' time. And usually that happens much closer to Christmas. So that's been kind of exciting. And I think we're going to take a lot away from that experience. So I'm going to let Zoe introduce herself a little bit and tell you a little bit about herself.
Hi, I'm Zoe. I'm from Switzerland, and I feel like we've done a lot of things and activities, even with all the restrictions and limitations that COVID has brought. But yeah, we've been able to grow quite close because we've spent so much time together. I mean, I can still do hobbies. I do sports and acting classes and everything. Last weekend we went to a light parade, and we just we're still doing things on weekends, and even during the week we have created kind of a pod, so we're like 3 families that only see each other. So I still kind of get this kind of social life where there's 3 other children I am involved with and have become friends with. I up until last week, I've been going to class twice a week, but now they've closed down. So I'm gonna be virtual until January 20th. Yeah.
So I don't know if anyone has any specific questions for us. You know, a couple things that Zoe's gotten involved in is that she does Kung Fu in Switzerland, and we don't have Kung Fu locally, but we do have a very active Taekwondo club. So they've been doing Taekwondo outside or by Zoom. So she's still able to do that 3 times a week. So that gets her, she's met some friends through that activity. My husband and I are very involved in the local fire department and volunteer ambulance. And so Zoe has been able to join as a junior member. And we do a lot of safe training activities. We're smaller groups and things, but Zoe's been able to participate at the firehouse in those sort of activities, which I think has been really fun for her. When we go off on the weekends, we, because a lot of times I've not done the things that we're about to do, we call them our COVID adventures. And so every week we are, my daughter kind of laughs at us. She's home from college right now. And she's like, so what's the newest COVID adventure that we're going on this weekend? So we're just trying to make it fun any way that we can. And I think we're doing it.
Thank you. And I have some questions for you coming from the attendees. First one is, what do Zoe's parents think about her being in the US during the pandemic? I assume that you were applying sort of around the same time or shortly before the pandemic began. What was that like? Did you have to convince your parents, or were they?
No, my parents they were very supportive of it. They never did an exchange year, but they were happy that I wanted to do one. And right now, like, Switzerland had a second wave, so it was actually safer for me to be here than in Switzerland. So they are not worried.
Okay, great. Another question for you, Zoe. I would be interested in whether Zoe has been following our national politics and what she thinks of it. Also, what she thinks of how we are handling the pandemic versus how Switzerland is handling it.
Yeah, I have been following the politics. I stayed up at election night. I well, I I don't necessarily agree with Trump's politics. However, Switzerland's handling of the pandemic hasn't been very great either. They haven't been closing down again because of the economy. So, yeah.
That was a beautifully diplomatic response to a difficult question. Are there other students, AFS students in your area with your area team, Andrea?
Yes, so our team is hosting 7 students this year. So we were very excited about that. And what we did is we podded our students, or clustered them so that they could have a pod. So we have 3 students in Falls Village going to that high school. We have 3 students in West Hartford, and then one more student who's just outside of Hartford, and she's in a pod with them. So this way our students would still have the opportunity to have the ability to make friends with other students who are having a similar experience. And the families have all agreed to be in the same pods with each other where the kids go to the same schools. So that's been really helpful to allow our students to have a more full exchange this year.
Okay, Zoe, what do you miss the most about Switzerland?
I mean, to be honest, I thought I would be missing my family and my family more than I actually am. I thought I would be more homesick, but since I have kind of like, and I'm leading another life and I have another family, so they're like replacing my old family, so I'm not really missing my family at home.
Okay. Also, Zoe, what has been the most memorable thing that you've done so far?
That's a hard question. Well, when we went on a light show last weekend, which was pretty impressive. We walked through it and it was beautiful. Also, when I went on, I've gone on 2 fire calls, like ambulance calls so far with the fire department. And when I helped the firemen, like we tested the cars and stuff, so we drove around with, yeah.
Oh, when you were testing the fire trucks?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
We drove around in the fire trucks. That was pretty cool.
And she got to be in one of the light parades in the fire truck. So I think that was a lot of fun.
Great, absolutely. Andrea, do you see a connection between your interest in AFS and your interest in service via ambulance?
I do. It was, so I've been involved in emergency services for almost 25 years now. And when I was in high school, two of my best friends were AFSers who were in my high school. But I didn't really know about the origin of AFS at that time and when I got started. But I do see that there is really some great overlap. And I think that the connection actually makes it a little more meaningful to me, that although, and I do think sometimes currently with COVID, some of our operations are not a lot different than they are during wartime, especially back in March and April, and it was really difficult. But I do think that that connection has really hit home in the last couple of years for me.
Okay, great. Zoe, what are your plans for the future?
I want to become a director. So I want to study in the United States.
Okay.
And she's been able to do some, she actually is in a film studies class this year. And this weekend, she spent the entire weekend, she found, not sure where, but she found an 84-hour film challenge. And so she had to create her entire film within 84 hours. So this, this kept her really busy. I mean, she's not having trouble finding things to do, even with COVID.
Very interesting. Another question for you, Zoe. What is the most significant learning experience that you've had since being here beyond the great family sharing that has taken place?
Maybe how important like being social actually is, and being in school in person, because it's been really tough, like not being able to go to school for the full week. Like it's hard to stay on task and everything.
Okay. A comment from someone who was an AFSer from Turkey to the United States in 1967. Thank you so much for your involvement in AFS, hosting your student, and for your emergency service to your community.
Well, I'm happy to do it. I actually get much more out of all of that than what I'm giving to either organization.
Beautiful. All right. Are there any other questions? You have a second or two to put them into the chat box. Thank you again, Andrea and Zoe. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Tara, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you, Andrea and Zoe. That was great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our priorities as we get ready to enter into 2021. We have 5 of them. The first one I'm going to start with is talking about financial health of the organization. With the strong leadership provided by the board and the senior staff, we continue to manage a very challenging financial situation. We've made financial decisions to reduce staffing, to lower salaries, and to eliminate a number of programs and initiatives. But I want you to know that everyone is working so hard and diligently to navigate this challenging financial period of time. And although we've made good progress in our cost reductions and fundraising, we're not yet out of the woods. We need to get through this year to get to the next program cycle, where we do expect a significant increase in program volume. And AFS-USA is working with all of its network partners. All the different AFS partner countries around the world are also facing challenges, but we're committed to getting significant volume back up, at least 50% of the volume back in place for 21-22. So concisely, our priority is to survive this financial challenge of this academic year and this fiscal year, with the anticipation that next year, the school year will provide us with significantly more volume and revenue to come into AFS-USA and for more American students to go abroad. And there's a long list of ifs and what's going to happen categories of topics that we don't know that's going to influence how we operate and where we operate. But the two most significant unknowns for AFS-USA at this point in time is, will schools have the capacity and the ability to host next year? Everyone is very optimistic about the vaccine, and that's a wonderful thing, but we do have a cycle that as an organization we have to follow and get the students placed in the spring. So I'm going to talk in a few minutes about our strategy for schools, but this is the fundamental base, the fundamental foundational element that we have to have in place for the students to be able to come into the United States. And related to that is, will students from other countries come on the program? Will they want to come on the program? I wish we had 2,000 Zoes around the world and Zoe's parents, but some people in different parts of the world have different capabilities, and we don't even have travel that's resumed in all parts of the world. So as a network, we're trying to be very flexible, and if a certain country can't send, we'll trade off and all of that. But we're looking to host over 1,000 students next year and to send close to 200 students. That is our conservative goal. If we have more, we would love to host more, but we're planning conservatively. The second priority is to utilize technology more, and that feeds into how we work and technology as part of our programs. Last spring, when physical exchanges were being curbed significantly, there was a strong need to provide program activity, and it made sense for AFS-USA to consider developing virtual programs. And I'm going to be very honest with you, I was quite skeptical in the beginning as to who would want to do a completely virtual exchange, an intercultural exchange. What would that look like? But my skepticism started to wane as we explored the opportunities and capabilities. And over this past summer, a group of AFS partners worked together, and we worked to develop a virtual program that involved workshops, discussion groups, video presentations, project topics, team exercises, culture-related games, and much more. And we offered it to students all around the world, and it was quite impressive that more than 50% of the participants on that program were American students. And this proved to me that no matter the limitations of the pandemic, young people around the world want to have and need to have intercultural exchanges, regardless of how those experiences are delivered. You might be wondering, what about the host family component? That's a foundational part of an AFS program. And what about engaging with young people in another country? And we were able to really test this concept thanks to the virtual programming grant that we received from the U.S. Department of State that enabled our participants who were supposed to go on the YES and FLEX programs, and their mobility portion was paused, that we were able to offer virtual programming. And these students had virtual orientations, and even though the experience would be completely virtual, the host families also had a virtual orientation, and they were placed with a family. And in addition to the host families, we had a group of 35 American teenagers work as peer groups to connect with these students while they were on program. And even though they were not attending a U.S. high school, they were still learning about a new culture. They were making friends, and their friends were learning about them and their culture. And I wish I had time to tell you about all of the interesting components that they had, but to give you a taste of some of them, they had a group tour virtually of the Statue of Liberty. They had a volunteer-led visit to the Marine Mammal Center in San Francisco, led by a volunteer. They had an iCivics program built around the U.S. election. They learned about racial bias in the United States, and they participated in a Day of the Dead celebration, exploring Native American history in New Mexico, and more. And AFS volunteers and staff work together to develop the foundational curriculum for these programs. And it's really taught us that we can do things in a creative way that are meaningful and are mission aligned, and that there's no reason that due to COVID and the pandemic that AFS should stop focusing on program and intercultural learning. So as we move forward, you're going to see in all of our programs more of a virtual component, and we will keep many of these virtual programs in our program portfolio. Our third priority is our work with schools. And even before COVID, AFS-USA's strategic plan emphasized the importance of expanding our work with schools and strengthening our relationships with educators. AFS-USA's livelihood and its existence is in so many ways dependent on schools, on teachers, on administrators, on principals, on school district guidelines and policies, at the state level as well. And as AFS-USA moves forward, strengthening our relationship with these audiences will be a key strategic driver. We're working on a variety of initiatives to give back to schools, to provide teachers with resources to help them in their efforts to bring global competency alive in the classroom. Of course, hosting a student with AFS is a great way to bring global competency alive in the classroom, but so many classrooms in the United States are diverse, and there's a need for dialogue. There's a need for intercultural sensitivity, and AFS has a place and a role and an opportunity to do more with teachers. I have a quote that I want to share with you that comes from Miss Regina Puzat, who is the World Language Education Program Consultant for the Kansas State Department of Education. Quote, "Many of our students across our state benefit from intercultural learning opportunities and exchanges. Students in some of our urban districts go to high schools where, although there is much diversity, often there is no conscious support to help students navigate their cultural differences. Students in our rural districts live and go to school in communities where there is very little diversity as well, and very little opportunity to socialize with people from other cultures," unquote. I want to point out that Regina has been involved with AFS since her high school days, not because she's an AFS returnee, not because her family hosted an AFS student, but because she was active in the AFS club in her high school, and that shaped her future and her career and her thinking. And the United States needs more educators like Regina who have been touched by AFS. The fourth priority is diversity and becoming a more diverse organization. Now, this is a perplexing question, given that we're an intercultural learning organization that introduces people to diverse cultures and perspectives through our programs. And that is absolutely true, but that is the tip of the iceberg. And as an organization, we are not doing enough. We are not diverse enough in our program mix with our participants. We're not diverse enough in our volunteer base. We're not diverse enough in our host families. And we're really missing so many opportunities in so many cultures across this large country. So that will be a driving strategy. And the fifth one is volunteer engagement. Critical to AFS's future is keeping our volunteers engaged in the organization during COVID. And this is challenging because we know that the vast majority of our volunteers volunteer because they thrive on the interactions that they have with students like Zoe and with host families like Andrea's and with students who are going abroad and the natural parents. And we have such reduced volume that there aren't that many opportunities right now. So keeping in communication, providing learning opportunities through technology is critical. And I want to point out that many of our volunteer teams are using technology to maintain the social benefits that come along with being an AFS-USA volunteer. And I've heard about virtual book clubs, holiday celebrations, painting classes, TED Talks, virtual cooking, connecting with students who had been on the program in years past or with alumni. So I have all the confidence that our volunteers who are so motivated by our mission will find a way to stay involved. But we want to be very conscious that we don't forget about the importance of that relationship with our volunteers. So we are going to open the floor for questions. I saw a few coming in, but I think if Julie is able to, could we play maybe one or two? I don't know how many we think we can get in, so we leave time for questions of the American students.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think we can do 2 or 3, right, Julie?
Correct. I have them all ready.
That is working.
So,
Great.
and just one second. And just one moment. Sorry about that. And if you can't hear it, please let me know, but it should work now.
Hi, my name is Catherine. I'm a returnee from Chile, and returning itself was quite hard. It was unfortunate. There's no way to get around that. And I'd suggest to keep in contact with your host family, with your friends, with your volunteer. In my case, I was very close to my AFS volunteer. We went to Peru together. And I would go over to her house to make pancakes or play board games. And, you know, coming home was difficult because I had just begun to form bonds within the community from, you know, people at school to my host family to the cashier at the grocery stores, you know, finding those relationships and maintaining those relationships even after your exchange is incredibly important. And I think my AFS experience overall just taught me to appreciate all the moments. You know, you're on this adventure and it won't be glamorous every single second, but to remember where you are and just to acknowledge the smaller things, that is one of the best parts of the exchange. And I'm here now at UC San Diego studying international studies and political science and hope to one day work in the Peace Corps and or for AFS. So, bye.
And we'll be sharing just a couple more. One second.
Matthew Boyle. I did my exchange year in Germany from August of 2019 to March of 2020 when it ended early due to COVID-19. And I think that my exchange year prepared me in a unique way to understand the COVID-19 pandemic and how it has affected the world and how there needs to be some sort of united response to combat the virus. I think by being an exchange student, you understand a different meaning of these worldwide issues such as social justice issues, the climate crisis issues, and obviously most recently the COVID-19 pandemic. And you understand that there needs to be strong global connections and there needs to be a strong united mission among the countries around the world in order to combat these issues effectively. These are issues that impact every single country, and although they might impact countries in different ways, we are all, at the end of the day, affected by them. And by being an exchange student is the best way that we can create those global connections and help create global responses to these issues.
Okay, we'll share one more for now. Maybe we'll have time for an additional.
Hi, my name is Caitlin Jarzak, and I was an exchange student in France from January 2020 to March 2020. I was sent home during the coronavirus pandemic, and AFS honestly did an amazing job of taking care of us and bringing us home safely. Although it was so sudden and nobody knew exactly what was going on, we all managed to get back. And I don't believe that anybody I know who was also going home with me contracted the virus, so that was good. All the AFS volunteers and everybody, they were so nice and supportive about the whole situation. Everything happened as fast as it possibly could have and as efficiently as it could have during the pandemic. So I am extremely grateful, and I was so happy to be able to get back to my family during such an interesting time.
Okay. And do we have time for one more?
I think we'll move on to make sure we have time
Yeah.
for the questions.
Yes.
But thank you, Julie. We can also share these with everyone afterwards. We'll send you the links. They're all on YouTube. We'd be happy to share them with you. So we have a couple of questions, and if you have questions that come to mind while we're talking, remember to send them to me either via the Q&A or the chat box. So Tara, the first question is, do you have a view of what the program capacity will be for 2021 to 22? Number of students able to send.
Right. So I saw that pop up. I threw in my comment before. We're looking to host at least 1,000 students to 1,200 students. And if we have more students, we certainly will strive to place as many as we can get. But to be conservative, that's what we're looking at. And we're also looking to send about 200 students as a baseline.
Okay. How can we all help AFS keep alive and thriving during the pandemic and its aftermath?
Well, I think there are a number of things. Of course, we always greatly appreciate a contribution. That's a big help. But locally, being engaged with the volunteer teams or the chapters in your area. We're going to be asking a lot of our volunteers as we move into the spring to be finding host families and finding school placements and doing orientations, and so many of the foundational elements that make AFS work. You know, we do expect that it will be tougher in this environment, and perhaps schools that have hosted will still host, but maybe they won't be able to host as many as they used to host. So we're going to be putting out an all points bulletin that will be needing help to recruit schools, to recruit families, as alumni, as returnees. Who better to speak to the AFS experience? As a former host parent, who better to speak to a potential new host family? So really making you know, the foundation of AFS work locally across the country is very important.
Okay. What is the best way to help a school's international club connect with students who are in the country but not in their area, or even the sponsored program students who are doing virtual exchange?
Can you say that one again? That was a lot.
Sure. The best way a high school's international club might connect with AFS students who are in the US but not in their local area, since there are so few scattered around, or even some of the students who are going through the virtual exchanges, can they connect?
I would suggest that if this is a local volunteer asking the question, to connect with your field specialist staff member, and we can see how we could connect schools doing that. I'm sure there's many different ways to do it, and will be unique to that particular area of the country.
Okay. How is AFS planning to diversify the organization?
So there's many aspects to this, and we had started this past year working with our volunteer development and organizational development projects to be more consciously outreaching to other organizations in local communities, to be more inclusive, inviting people into local teams. Of course, looking for host families that perhaps come from communities outside where the existing volunteers, you know, their circles exist. We're looking at our hiring practices. We're looking at our board membership. And being conscious to be to be actively promotive and proactively seeking more diverse cultures and people to be part of AFS at all levels and in all aspects of the organization.
Okay. A comment. Thank you, Zoe and the American students. It's wonderful to see you. My town doesn't have a chapter, and I'd like to know where there is an AFS support group north of Boston.
So I think we will follow up with you directly. We have many volunteers in the New England team and the Vermont team, and I'm sure we can find something. So we'll, Melvin, we can just take down the person's name and make sure we get back to them.
I already have. Is there any indication yet of which partners will be sending students to the U.S. in the coming future, or in the coming year?
So all I can say is at this point, no partner has told us that they will not be sending. They are optimistically planning to send. Frankly, they need to send. The United States is a key destination for every partner in the network. Hopefully for countries where travel is still frozen, that will change by next August. But at this point, no country, no partner has indicated they would not participate on the Northern Hemisphere 21 program.
Okay. And I failed to mention in the previous comment that the person posing the question was a student to Japan in what she called Ancient History 1959, but she's had 4 others in her family who've gone on to be AFSers. So thank you for that. Wondering if there's a discussion to expand the semester program for January 2022. Schools may be more prepared at this time to accept students, and it may be a good option.
Yes, it may be a good option. I'll be honest that it has not been a really viable cycle for AFS in the past. We have tried for many years to increase our hosting on the Southern Hemisphere cycle, and schools have traditionally been, on the whole, not that receptive. But I think it's a whole new ballgame now post-COVID, and we shouldn't be ruling anything out. There is certainly tremendous interest in the AFS network to send on Southern Hemisphere semester, so that is not a problem. But as our volunteers start going out and talking to schools for Northern Hemisphere 21, always asking about Southern Hemisphere 22 cannot hurt. So.
Okay. This one, has AFS done a survey or any sort of study that assesses the impact that AFS has had in the world?
There have been a number of impact studies done over the years. I believe AFS-USA participated in the last one about 5 years ago, but we can make those available if they're not up on the website or in my AFS as it is now. But we have not done one in the past, at least the last 3 to 5 years. We've not done one. We will be looking to do one with Congress Bundestag students. That's coming as part of the grant, that they'll be doing an impact study, a multiple year study, but that will take quite a while to complete.
Okay. Someone asks if we're considering a virtual program for adults.
I think it's a great idea and something we should take up for sure. So great suggestion.
I have a comment. Thank you so much for putting this meeting together. All the best. And I think I've covered all of the questions that were submitted. Does anyone else have any further questions that you'd like to pose, either to Tara or to our guest speakers? Okay.
Okay, but as in closing, I just want to take a moment to introduce a video that was done for our volunteer summit, I think, which took place in November with great success. And I'm pleased to introduce that this message comes from Mr. Richard Engel. Richard is an AFS returnee, U.S. to Italy from 1991, and he currently serves as NBC News Chief Foreign Correspondent, It's a lot to get out. A position he was assigned to in April of 2008 after being the network's Middle East correspondent and Beirut bureau chief. Richard has covered major international events, including the Arab Spring, the war in Afghanistan, and the conflict in Somalia. A native New Yorker, Richard grew up on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, attended the Riverdale Country School, and spent a year in Italy as an AFS exchange student. Quote, "My AFS experience was my first taste outside the world I knew and my first taste of an international lifestyle. It was intriguing, it was seductive, and it was delicious," he said. And he strongly credits his AFS year with influencing his future career path and giving him a globally engaged mindset. So we're just going to listen to Richard for a minute or two before we close.
Hello, everyone. I'm Richard Engel, and I love AFS. I love the AFS volunteers. You are the ones who make this program work. You are the ones who make the students feel comfortable, which is not easy considering they are away from their families in a foreign environment. And you make the host families feel comfortable, and it is absolutely nerve-wracking for them. They are hosting teenagers who are likely to get into trouble in a foreign environment where they generally, at least at first, don't speak the language. That's how I felt when I first went to Italy so many years ago. I was in Palermo, Sicily, and it was the greatest experience of my life. I showed up there.